Chapter 1, Breach of Faith. At noon of February 25, 1986, as the Philippines teetered on the brink of a real revolution, people and an electric air filled the historic Club Filipino in Green Hills, San Juan, Metro Manila, to witness the hasty oath-taking of Mrs. Corazon Cojuangco Aquino as the 11th president. In defiance of President Ferdinand Marcos, who held a similar ceremony in Malacañang a few kilometers away. To those present, most of whom had risked their lives only 3 days earlier on EDSA as human buffer to the breakaway of then rebellious Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile, Deputy Chief of Staff General Fidel V. Ramos, and the reformist soldiers, it was a supreme act of faith and hope that Mrs. Aquino would establish a good, just, honest, and efficient government. Appearing to match faith with faith, Mrs. Aquino, the naive icon of Philippine democracy and religious Catholic supremacy, humbly accepted the gift of power, took her oath of office and pledged to obey the fundamental law of the land or constitution, enforce the laws, and do justice to everyone. Then she said,
"Beloved brothers and sisters, it is fitting that, if the rights and liberties of our people were taken away at midnight 14 years ago, the people should recover those rights and liberties in full daylight. It took the brutal murder of Ninoy to bring about a unity so strong, and the phenomenon of people power. We became exiles in our own land, we Filipinos who are at home only in freedom, when Marcos destroyed the Republic 14 years ago. Through the power of the people we are home again. And now I would like to appeal to everybody to work for national reconciliation, which is what Ninoy came home for. Continue to pray. Pray to the Lord to help us, especially during these difficult days."
Appearing proud and magnanimous, she announced to the nation and the world that she would restore unity, genuine reconciliation, and democratic space. That she would not file charges against Marcos, that she would not reside in the presidential palace because in these difficult times, it is not proper to live in extravagance, and that she would be the opposite of Marcos. At the Thanksgiving Mass at the Luneta Park on March 3, a week after she took her oath of office, President Aquino also said,
"We owe our mandates to the people. And it is a sacred trust that must not be violated. No one will be exempted from my uncompromising pledge not to tolerate graft and corruption, nepotism, usurpation, and abuse of power and authority, extravagance, incompetence, abuse of human rights and violations of the basic freedom of speech, assembly, thought and nonviolent action."
Instead of all these, what many people witnessed during her term was a repetition of a strongman rule and an era of hatred, vengeance, and disunity that lasted beyond her term. And the bitter irony came on November 25, 1999, at the announcement in Malacañang of the formal creation of the Commission of the 1986 EDSA Revolution, when she warned President Estrada, by quoting American author George Santayana's famous line that,
"Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it."
She described the quotation as
wise words not just for our children and grandchildren, but for all of us to heed.
Why did she not remember the famous quotation when she was the president for 6 years and 4 months? Obviously, she did not. Marcos in 1972 declared martial law, abolished the Constitution, jailed his opponents, violated human rights and plundered the treasury and the economy. President Aquino in 1986 also ruled by decree, abolished the 1973 Constitution, violated human rights and betrayed the Filipino people. By comparison, President Aquino may have been worse than Marcos, judging by her own record. Before the end of 1991, the Aquino government strangely assumed all the 194 billion pesos liabilities incurred by Marcos in 20 years and unjustly dumped them on the shoulders of the Filipino. It meant that instead of benefiting from the Marcos purloined wealth, each of the 76 million Filipinos ended up with an additional liability of 2,421 pesos, using the 194 billion pesos as a multiplying variable. Not only that, by her action or inaction, she may have violated her own constitution because 419 accounts of the total assumed liabilities, valued at 147 billion pesos, including 130 fraudulent loans granted on the behest of Marcos and his cronies, were the object of massive recovery operations and prosecutions by her own creation, the Presidential Commission on Good Government or PCGG. The Constitution in Section 24 Article 6 provides that all appropriation, revenue, or tariff bills, bills authorizing increase of public debt, bills of local application, and private bills shall originate exclusively in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments. Marcos spent 448 billion pesos in 20 years. Aquino disbursed almost 1.6 trillion pesos in 6 years and 4 months. Aquino built a complex of overpasses in Metro Manila, Marcos constructed a network of roads and bridges. It took a revolution to unravel Marcos, there was none in the case of Mrs. Aquino, but her regime left behind a paper trail that revealed its own misdeeds. Marcos resorted to propaganda hyperbole to obscure his failure, Aquino did the same with her yellow banners and confetti. For instance, the popular impression that recalcitrant politicians and rebel soldiers were to blame for her government's failure and economic debacle, as repeatedly dished out by her paid local and international propagandists, deserve a thorough review because neither the rebel soldiers nor the politicians were in charge of the country during her term. President Aquino and her bumbling cabinet were. They controlled the currency, contracted debts, shaped the budget, and decided the economic priorities with her hotshot technocrats. It is easy to understand that President Aquino and her cabinet were indeed responsible if the people would only take a second look at her national budget and flawed economic policies. For instance, from 1986 to 1991, the Aquino government budget amounted to more than 1.1 trillion pesos. Of this enormous amount, Congress got a total appropriation of only 4.4 billion pesos. In particular, the legislature had a total appropriation of only 1.23 billion pesos, check figures, 900 million for the House and 330 million for the Senate. The executive department, by comparison, spent close to 240 billion pesos annually, including 100 billion for debt servicing to foreign creditors, in compliance with her national policy to honor all debts, regardless of how they were acquired and spent. This is not to say that Congress was blameless. Far from it. For it had also its own shares of serious misdeeds, inaction, omission, sex and firearms scandals, and some useless investigations, to cite only a few. But in the crucial arena of national administration, which was how the people felt government presence in their lives, it was the executive branch that was on the front lines, having had the powers and the tools, in terms of the budget and the bureaucracy, to deliver public services like water and electricity. The reason for this was simple: the executive branch was the seat of action, Congress the seat of deliberations. The unbridled graft and corruption in her government resided chiefly in the corridors of the executive branch, the revenue bureaus, and the special revenue-earning bodies such as the casinos, lottos, and the franchising and regulatory offices. And the failure to control the military, to stifle insurgencies, and the maintenance of peace and order was the function of the president, who is also the commander-in-chief. In sum, the key complaints of the citizenry against profligacy, favoritism, nepotism, cronyism, dynastism, extravagance, the deteriorating economy, and incompetence led to the door of the Aquino government. When President Aquino addressed the U.S. Congress in 1986, she missed a historic opportunity to ask the American government to write off the $26.3 billion indebtedness that the Marcos regime bequeathed to her administration, as was the case of Poland, Egypt, and other economically distressed countries. In fact, many people cannot understand why at that precise moment when the U.S. Congress accorded her with the highest respect and one of the longest standing ovations, for her role in the People Power Revolution, President Aquino turned her back on the people and pledged instead to honor the debts, including fraudulent ones. At that time, the United States was, and still is, the most influential member of the International Monetary Fund World Bank with 265,518 or 17.78% voting power. In comparison, Japan and Germany had 82,665 or 5.53% each, while France and Britain had 74,396 or 4.98% each.